The Nile has always been more than a river. It is a ribbon of life cutting through a vast, unyielding desert, the gentle pulse at the heart of an ancient civilization. To live beside it was to be woven into a rhythm older than memory, a rhythm dictated not by clocks or calendars, but by the turning of the seasons, the height of the waters, and the whisper of the wind over its surface. Imagine the first light of day before the sun has yet breached the horizon. The skies are deep, cool blue, shading into pale silver along the eastern edge, where day prepares to rise. The air carries a faint chill, the kind that lingers only briefly before the warmth of the sun takes hold. From the riverbank the water appears still, though it is always moving, a slow, patient flow south to north, carrying with it the silt, the nutrients, and the memories of distant lands. A thin veil of mist rises from the surface, catching what little light there is and softening every shape into something dreamlike. The reeds sway almost imperceptibly, their narrow leaves trembling with the faintest touch of breeze. Somewhere in the distance a bird calls, a heron perhaps, its cry carrying far in the morning quiet. Another answers, and the sound drifts over the water like a small ripple. The Nile in these early hours belongs to the fisherman. Far down the bank a figure moves slowly, deliberately, his reed boat drawn partly onto the shore. It is a narrow craft, light enough to push into the water alone, its frame bound together with papyrus cord and coated in pitch. He kneels to check his nets, woven from flax fibres and mended with care the night before, running his fingers along the cord to ensure there are no breaks. Each knot, each loop, is known to him by feel alone. Fishing is not simply work, it is part of the same cycle that governs the planting and the harvest. Just as the farmer waits for the flood, the fisherman waits for the schooling of certain fish, for their patterns are as seasonal as the river itself. Close by, two women step down to the shallows, their linen garments wrapped tightly at the waist, the hem already damp with river spray. They carry woven baskets filled with garments, the fabric pale and stiff from yesterday's sun. Without haste they kneel and press the cloth into the water, working with a steady rhythm, soak, lift, beat gently against the flat stones. The sound is soft but regular, blending with the gentle lap of the river. Soap, in its crude form, is made from a mixture of clay and ash. They work it into the linen with practiced motions. The scent is faint, earthy, clean, a note of ash lingering in the cool air. Along the bank small birds dart between the reeds, their movements quick against the unhurried pace of everything else. A kingfisher, its feathers glinting blue and copper in the new light, hovers briefly before plunging into the water with barely a splash, rising again with a flicker of silver in its beak. As the sun begins its slow climb, the mist thins and the colours shift. The pale silver of the early sky deepens into gold, the water reflecting the change in shimmering bands. The desert beyond the fertile bank remains in shadow for a while longer, its dunes cold and silent, but the green strip along the river brightens as though waking. Palms lift their fronds in stillness, their long shadows stretching toward the water. A pair of white ibises step carefully along the edge, each footfall so precise it barely leaves a mark. From somewhere inland, the first sounds of the village begin to reach the river. A low murmur of voices, the clatter of pottery, the faint bleating of goats. But the river holds its own sound, not loud, not forceful, but constant. It is the quiet whisper of current against bank, the gentle swish of reeds, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. To live here is to always hear it, even when the mind drifts elsewhere. It is the backdrop to every meal, every conversation, every night's sleep. In the cool season, mornings last longer. The sun's rise is slow and gentle, its warmth creeping into the air by degrees. Those who live along the Nile know the gift of this softness. The summer brings a harsher light, a quicker heat that forces work to start earlier still. But in the spring and autumn, there is time to stand and watch, to see how the light transforms the water from silver to gold, to feel the sand still cool beneath the feet, to take in the sight of distant fields just visible beyond the palms. Every life here bends toward the river. Children learn to swim almost as soon as they can walk, their first splashes watched by parents who have done the same in their own childhood. Farmers rise before the sun to walk the fields, but not before checking the water level, noting the height of the marks on the bank from the last flood. Traders load their goods onto small boats, binding jars of beer and baskets of grain with ropes of twisted papyrus. Priests walk to the temple pools, drawing water for rituals as old as the settlement itself. Even those who never leave their village can name the river's moods: the glassy stillness of the dry season, the strong, silt-rich current after the flood, the faint green tinge when the papyrus flowers open in summer. They can tell you by the smell of the air if the wind is coming from the south, carrying warm, damp breath from distant lakes, or from the north, where the delta opens into the sea. And in all of this, the fishing, the washing, the planting, the watching, there is no sense of hurry. The Nile teaches patience. Its rise and fall is measured not in hours but in moons. Its gifts come slowly, steadily, and only to those who have learned to match its pace. Here the river is not just the source of life, it is life. Every grain of wheat, every loaf of bread, every jar of beer owes its existence to the thin, dark line of fertile earth along its banks. Every reed mat, every papyrus scroll, every clay pot shaped and fired in the villages carries the mark of the river's hand. To live beside the Nile is to live within an endless exchange, to take from it and to give back to it in offerings, in care, in reverence. And so the day begins. The fisherman pushes his boat into the current. The women lift their washed linen into baskets to dry in the sun. The sun clears the horizon, laying a path of light across the water, and the Nile, as it has for thousands of years, continues on its slow, eternal journey north. The Nile's mornings are never identical, yet each one carries a sameness that comforts. The air just after sunrise is neither warm nor cool, a perfect balance that invites unhurried movement. Shadows stretch long and thin, and the sky holds a softness that will soon yield to the clear, unwavering brightness of the day. On the riverbank, activity begins in ripples, much like the water itself. A fisherman stands ankle-deep in the shallows, his toes curling into the cool mud. His boat, long and narrow, made of bound papyrus stalks, floats lightly at the water's edge. It sways with each breath of the current, tethered loosely by a loop of reed rope around a stake driven into the bank. The boat's woven surface is smooth to the touch, but smells faintly of the pitch used to seal it. Beside him, coiled in a neat bundle, is his fishing net, its flax cords darkened from years of use, patched and mended in dozens of places. He knows each repair, for his hands made them. Before pushing off, he squats and dips both hands into the Nile, letting the water run over his fingers, the way one might greet an old friend. He watches how it moves, how the surface folds over itself, carrying tiny motes of dust and silt downstream. He is looking for signs, the small disturbances that mean fish are near, the faint widening of a ripple caused by something moving beneath. Not far away, a young boy follows his father down to the shore. He carries a shallow clay bowl filled with bait, river snails, their shells still wet from being pried off the stones. The boy sets the bowl down gently on the sand and watches his father work, memorizing every step without speaking. This is how learning happens here. Slowly, without instruction, the body imitating what the eyes have watched for years. A little farther along the bank, two women kneel beside a flat stone worn smooth by decades of use. Their linen skirts are tucked up at the waist, their hair bound in simple ties to keep it from falling forward. One dips a garment into the river, the pale fabric billowing underwater like a ghost, then pulls it out and lays it over the stone. With a flat wooden paddle, she beats the cloth in a steady rhythm, not forceful, but firm enough to press out the dirt. The sound is a soft thok, followed by the quiet rush of water as she dips it again. Beside her, the second woman twists a sheet between her hands, wringing it until the last drops fall back into the river. The water is cool here, shaded by overhanging palms and acacia trees whose roots grip the bank tightly. In the branches above, a pair of small birds chatter to each other, darting out over the water to catch insects before returning to their perch. From time to time, a kingfisher flashes by, a brief streak of blue and orange, then hovers perfectly still before plunging into the surface with a clean, narrow splash. As the sun rises higher, more villagers appear along the river's edge. A farmer leads two donkeys down to drink, their hooves sinking slightly into the wet sand. They lower their heads and lap noisily, pausing only to shake their ears at the flies already beginning to stir. A little girl follows behind, carrying a small jug to fill with water. She steps carefully, avoiding the deeper patches, and crouches to scoop the water in slow, deliberate motions. The jug is heavy when full, but she carries it back without complaint. her bare feet leaving shallow prints that the current will soon erase. Beyond the shore, in the green strip of fertile land, other work begins. Men stoop in the fields to inspect the young barley shoots, their hands brushing the tops of the plants to gauge their strength. The soil is still damp from the last irrigation channel opened from the river, and the scent of wet earth mingles with the faint sweetness of flowering papyrus. The river itself changes colour as the light grows. What was silver at dawn becomes a pale green, then deepens toward blue as the sky clears. The sun's reflection moves steadily with the current, breaking into ripples that glitter briefly before smoothing out again. From certain angles, the water seems to hold the colour of the desert beyond, warm ochre tones that shift depending on the wind. In the midst of all this, there is no urgency. Every movement, casting a net, filling a jug, washing cloth, is done with the kind of patience learned from living with the Nile's pace. Here, time is measured not by minutes, but by the progress of shadows, by the height of the sun, by the scent of the air when the breeze shifts. There is no need to rush when the river will be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. A small group of boys gathers at a shallow bend where the water is calm. They splash each other, then float on their backs, letting the slow current carry them a few arms' lengths before they stand again. Their laughter carries across the water, bright and unrestrained, mingling with the deeper rhythmic sound of oars somewhere upriver. The fisherman from earlier is now a little way out from the bank, standing in his boat with practised balance. He lowers his net into the water in a wide arc, letting it settle before pulling it in again. The movement is slow, almost meditative, and each time he hauls it up he checks for the quick flash of silver among the cords. Sometimes there is nothing. Other times 2 or 3 small fish wriggle briefly before stilling. He lays them gently into a woven basket at his feet, the fish glistening in the sun. Downstream a trader's boat glides past, its single square sail catching the light breeze from the north. The boat is low in the water, heavy with jars sealed with clay and straw. As it passes the village, the trader calls out a greeting, and someone on the bank answers. There is no exchange of goods this morning, only the shared acknowledgement of neighbours whose lives are bound to the same river. By mid-morning, the riverbank hums softly with activity, but never loudly. It is a working space, a place of gathering, and a point of connection with the heart of the land. Everything begins here. The day's meals, the tools for work, the water for crops and homes, the news carried by boats from upriver. And everything that begins here will, in some way, return to the Nile, completing a circle that has been turning for as long as anyone can remember. By mid-morning, the Nile's banks are bathed in clear sunlight. The haze that softened the early light has burned away, leaving crisp outlines of palm fronds, papyrus stalks, and the faint silhouettes of far-off hills. The air is warm now, though the heat is not yet heavy, and this is the best time for the work that will carry the village through the coming days. Along the narrow, fertile strip beside the water, farmers move through their fields in quiet rhythm. They work in pairs, one guiding the oxen, the other walking just behind with a wooden plough. The animals move steadily, their hooves pressing deep into the damp soil. The wooden beam creaks softly as it turns the earth, exposing dark, rich layers still holding the coolness of the morning. The scent is deep and grounding, a mix of wet clay, crushed plants, and the faint sweetness of decomposing straw from last season's harvest. Farther upstream, papyrus harvesters wade into the shallows, cutting the tall stalks just above the root. The plants stand densely packed, their feathery tops swaying slightly as the men work. Each stalk is smooth and green, narrowing to a point that brushes lightly against their shoulders as they carry bundles to the bank. Once gathered, the papyrus will be stripped and split into thin strips for mats, ropes, and, for the finest stalks, the scrolls that carry the written word from a village to city. Near the heart of the settlement, the potter's work begins. A shaded awning of woven reeds casts a cool patch over the wheel, though dust still dances in the beams of sunlight that slip between the slats. The potter kneels, bare feet pressing against the wheel's base, turning it with slow, practiced movements. A lump of Nile clay, dug from the riverbed during the dry season, sits in his hands, damp and yielding. His fingers move with quiet precision, coaxing the shape upward. The sound is almost imperceptible. The low hum of the turning wheel, the occasional splash of water as he dips his hand to keep the clay supple. Around him, finished pots wait in the shade, their surfaces still soft to the touch, ready for the kiln. Beyond the potter's awning, a group of women sits weaving mats from dried reeds. They work with the same easy conversation that flows between neighbours who have known each other all their lives. The reeds rustle softly as they are bent and tightened, the fibres rasping against calloused fingertips. The finished mats will serve as flooring, bedding, or coverings for baskets, each one strong and flexible enough to last for years. The marketplace begins to stir as traders set out their goods. A fisherman from an upriver village lays out his catch on cool, damp leaves, the silver scales catching the light like scattered coins. A farmer arranges neat piles of onions, leeks and cucumbers, their green stalks still carrying the scent of the fields. Jars of beer sit in rows, sealed with straw stoppers, their earthy aroma mingling with the sharper scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby stall. The market is not noisy, yet it is alive. Footsteps crunch softly on packed earth. Low voices exchange greetings and simple bargains. A child laughs as she tries to carry a basket too large for her frame. The occasional bray of a donkey punctuates the air, followed by the gentle clink of pottery being moved, or the muffled thud of a basket set down. On the river itself, barges drift by, their sails taut with the wind from the north. One is heavy with limestone blocks, pale, sunlit slabs bound tightly with rope. Another carries amphorae of wine from the delta, the painted seals on each jar marking their place of origin. The crew call to each other in low tones, adjusting ropes and poles as the current carries them steadily toward their destinations. Back on shore, a scribe sits beneath the shade of a tamarisk tree, his reed pen in hand, a sheet of papyrus stretched across a smooth wooden board. He dips the pen into a small pot of black ink, carefully noting quantities of grain brought in from the fields, or recording an agreement between two traders. His work is silent but vital. Without his marks, memories fade and promises lose their weight. The faint scratching of reed on papyrus is almost lost in the breeze, but to those who notice, it is the sound of order and record in a world where most stories are carried only in speech. In the late morning light, everything has a clarity that will soon soften in the afternoon. The white linen garments of the villagers gleam against the deep green of the fields. The river's surface reflects the sky in shifting shades of blue, broken only by the gentle wake of a passing boat. From every corner of the settlement comes the sense of tasks being completed not out of urgency, but because the day's rhythm calls for them. Work here is not rushed, it is measured, steady, and always in harmony with the river's gifts. By the time the sun stands high, the market has settled into a quieter hum. The farmers have sold or traded much of their produce. The potters' fresh vessels sit drying in the shade. The papyrus harvesters have stacked their bundles neatly, ready for stripping. The river continues to move alongside it all, unbothered by the commerce, the tools, the voices. It has seen these scenes countless times before, and it will see them countless times again. By midday, the sun has reached its peak. The light now has a weight to it, bright, steady, and unyielding. Shadows, once long and cool in the morning, have shortened into neat dark pools beneath trees, awnings, and the edges of mud brick walls. The air holds the dry warmth of the desert, though along the riverbank a faint, almost invisible breeze still drifts in from the north, carrying the scent of water and green plants. Work slows as the heat deepens. Farmers lead their oxen into shaded enclosures. Fishermen haul their boats slightly higher onto the bank, securing nets to dry in the sun. Even the market traders, who began the day early, now retreat under canopies woven from reeds or palm fronds, their goods covered to protect them from the glare. It is a time not for labour, but for rest. A pause built into the rhythm of life beside the Nile. Under a wide date palm, a group of men sits in a loose circle on woven mats. Between them lies a low tray with flat loaves of bread, a small bowl of salt and a jar of beer brewed from barley. The beer is thick and slightly sour, nourishing as much as it's refreshing. They drink it slowly, passing the jar from hand to hand, speaking in low, unhurried tones. Their conversation drifts from the state of the fields to the progress of a neighbour's new roof, to a story from upriver about a crocodile sighted near the village ferry. Not far away, women gather in a shaded courtyard to prepare the midday meal. A fire smoulders in a clay hearth, its smoke rising lazily into the hot air. One woman kneels beside a stone grinding surface, her hands working a pestle over roasted barley, crushing it into a coarse flour. Another tends a pot of lentils, the water gently bubbling as she stirs with a wooden spoon. A third plucks dates from a basket, their skins slightly wrinkled, the flesh soft and sweet inside. The scents of baking bread, cooking lentils, and the faint caramel of the dates mingle in the still air, promising the comfort of a simple but satisfying meal. Children, freed from their small morning tasks, cluster in pockets of shade to play. Some chase each other around the courtyard, their bare feet kicking up light dust that hangs in the air before settling again. Others crouch over lines scratched in the dirt, moving small stones in a game passed down from their parents. Their laughter and shouts carry faintly over the muted hum of the village, a bright thread of sound that seems to dance with the occasional call of a bird overhead. In another corner, an elderly woman sits on a low stool, weaving palm fronds into a new basket. Her fingers are steady, though slower than they once were. Beside her, a young girl watches intently, occasionally reaching out to try her own hand at the pattern. The older woman's voice is soft as she tells a story, part memory, part legend, about a time when the Nile's flood came higher than any could remember, carrying both destruction and abundance in its wake. The girl listens wide-eyed, her small hands mimicking the folding and tucking of the fronds. Along the riverbank a few still linger. A man squats near the shallows mending a fishing net. His needle moves through the loops with careful precision, tightening and straightening the cords. Next to him, two boys sit with their feet in the water, letting the current swirl around their ankles. They toss pebbles into the deeper channel, watching the ripples spread and fade. Across the water, on the far bank, the tall stalks of papyrus cast thin, wavering shadows onto the surface. The hours after midday have a stillness unlike any other time of day. The animals rest, their movements slowed to a few lazy swishes of the tail or the occasional shift of weight. The air hums faintly with the sound of insects, their buzzing softened by the heat. Even the river, though never truly still, appears to move more slowly under the weight of the sun. Light glances off its surface in small, dazzling bursts, then smooths out again into gentle swells. Somewhere beneath the quiet there is always the presence of the river's promise, the assurance that its waters will return with the flood, that the fields will green again, that the rhythms of work, rest and trade will continue. Life here depends not on haste, but on constancy, and in the warm, slow hours of midday, that constancy feels like a blessing. By the time the heat begins to soften, the meal is finished. The men rise from the shade, stretching their limbs before returning to their work. The women rinse clay jars in the shallows, the cool water splashing gently against their hands. Children wander back to the fields, following parents or older siblings. The pause is over, but it leaves behind a lingering calm, a reminder that life beside the Nile is not just about survival, but about the quiet enjoyment of moments like these, shared in the company of others. For those who live along its banks, the Nile is not merely water. It is the breath of the land, the giver of grain, the thread that binds together every season, every harvest, every generation. And because it sustains life so completely, it is also sacred, a living presence, a god whose moods and movements shape the fate of all who depend on it. In the cool hours after the midday rest, before the evening work begins, the river often becomes a place of quiet devotion. Along a stretch near the temple, the bank has been smoothed and widened by generations of bare feet. Here, the priests of Hapi, the god of the inundation, descend the worn steps toward the water. They walk barefoot, their linen robes pale against the dark, wet earth. In their hands they carry offerings, baskets of figs, dates and barley bread, small jugs of beer, bundles of fresh-cut flowers. Each step is unhurried, deliberate, as though matching the slow movement of the current itself. At the water's edge they pause. The air carries the scent of papyrus and the faint mineral tang of the river. One priest kneels, dipping his hands into the cool surface, lifting water to his forehead before letting it fall back again. Another places the offerings gently upon small reed rafts, steadying them until they begin to drift downstream. The flowers sway with the movement, their colours vivid against the muted greens and browns of the river. The villagers watch from a respectful distance. Some join the priests in murmuring words of praise to Hapi, thanking him for the last flood and asking for another that is generous but not destructive. They know that too little water means hunger, and too much can sweep away homes and fields. The river's balance is delicate, and so their prayers are as much about moderation as abundance. The temple itself stands just beyond the bank, its mud brick walls cool in the shade of tall sycamore trees. Inside, a smaller basin holds water drawn directly from the Nile, renewed daily so it remains pure. Here, rituals unfold away from the public eye. The anointing of statues, the burning of incense, the chanting of hymns that speak of the river as both father and mother to the people. But the Nile's sacredness is not confined to the temple. For the farmer, the river is honoured each time he opens the irrigation channels, letting its waters spill into the thirsty fields. For the fisherman, every cast of the net carries a silent gratitude. Even children, taught from a young age to respect the river, will throw their first catch or the first slice of bread from a meal into the current as a simple act of thanks. Stories passed from elders to the young speak of the Nile's divine origins, how it flows from a place beyond the known world, a hidden source linked to the realm of the gods. Some say that in the afterlife, the blessed will find themselves on the banks of a river just like this one, green and fertile, where the sun is gentle and the harvest never ends. To pollute the Nile is not just careless, it is sacrilege, a stain on the sacred order. In the weeks before the expected flood, the mood in the villages changes. There is a quiet watchfulness, a heightened sense of the river's power. The priests consult their measurements, notched markers on the riverbank that record the height of the water each day. When the level begins to rise, word spreads quickly. Offerings increase. Songs are sung in the evenings, some light and playful, others solemn and reverent. Children are told to listen closely to the river at night, for it is said that when happy is pleased, the water sings softly to itself. Even outside of the flood season, the river's spiritual pull remains. A mother might bring her newborn to the shallows for a first touch of Nile water, a gesture meant to bless the child's life. A young man about to travel far may kneel at the bank, speaking his hopes into the rippling surface so that the river will carry them home in his absence. And when someone passes from this life, a small portion of water is poured upon the ground as a reminder that all things, like the river itself, move in cycles, returning in one form or another. As the sun begins to lower, the light shifts to gold, and the river gleams like a strip of molten metal. The priests have finished their rites. The offerings drift quietly downstream, some catching on reeds, others disappearing into the deeper current. The villagers linger for a moment longer before returning to their work, each carrying the silent reassurance that comes from honouring the source of life. The Nile will continue to flow long after the day's rituals fade, as it has for thousands of years. But in these small acts of devotion, the flowers set adrift, the prayers murmured into the breeze, the water lifted to the brow, the people affirm what they have always known, that their lives are bound to the river not only by need, but by reverence, trust, and gratitude. By the time the sun begins its descent, the air has softened. The intense brightness of midday has mellowed into a warm glow that spreads across the river in shimmering ribbons. Long shadows return, stretching out from palms and tamarisk trees, touching the water as though reaching to join it. The heat loosens its grip, replaced by a light dry breeze that carries the scent of earth and reeds. Along the bank, the day's final labours are quiet but purposeful. Fishermen return from the water, their boats heavy with the day's catch. Nets, now damp and smelling of river and fish, are spread out on the sand to dry in the evening air. Farmers walk slowly home from the fields, their steps unhurried after hours of work under the sun. They pass neighbours without rush, pausing to exchange a word or two, their silhouettes outlined in the fading gold light. In courtyards and shaded doorways, women prepare the evening meal. Clay ovens glow with small fires, their heat radiating outward as loaves of bread bake inside. The scent of grain and smoke drifts lazily across the village. In clay pots, stews of lentils or chickpeas bubble gently, their flavours deepening as they simmer. A few slices of salted fish, a handful of fresh cucumbers or onions. These small additions turn the meal into something worth lingering over. Children carry jugs of water from the river, the last of the day's light catching the ripples inside. The Nile itself changes with the lowering sun. What was bright blue in the afternoon now takes on a warmer hue, reflecting the sky's oranges, pinks and faint purples. The surface is smoother, the current appearing slower as the wind fades. Waterbirds settle in for the night. Herons stand still in the shallows, their long necks tucked, while ibises fly low across the water, their white feathers glowing faintly in the last light. As the sun sinks fully toward the horizon, the first stars appear. One by one, they emerge in the deepening indigo above, their reflections trembling softly on the river's surface. Torches are lit along the bank for those who will fish at night. The flames cast long, wavering lines of gold across the water, drawing moths and insects close. The fishermen work quietly, their voices low so as not to startle the fish, their boats drifting slowly in the darkness. In the village, the soundscape changes. The sharp noises of the day, the creak of ploughs, the splash of nets, the chatter of markets, give way to a gentler hum. There is the crackle of firewood, the soft murmur of evening conversation, the occasional laughter from a shared story. Dogs bark in the distance, answered by another farther away. Somewhere, a flute plays a slow, wandering tune, its notes carrying easily through the cooling air. The moon, when full, lays a silver path along the river. Even when it's just a crescent, its glow is enough to touch the tops of the reeds and glint on the ripples. The Nile becomes a mirror for the night sky, holding stars and moonlight in its dark surface. Those who cannot sleep, a fisherman mending his nets by torchlight, a mother rocking her child, a guard walking the edge of the village. All glance to the water at some point, as though checking in with a familiar friend. By this time, most homes are quiet. Inside, people rest on reed mats, their bodies cooling from the day's heat. The faint scent of the river drifts in through open doorways, mingling with the smell of baked bread and wood smoke. Crickets sing from the fields, their steady rhythm joining the low, constant whisper of the current. The Nile flows on, unseen now in the dark except where moonlight touches it. It carries with it the day's stories, the quiet mornings, the work and trade, the shared meals, the offerings to the gods. It also carries the promise of tomorrow, when the same cycle will begin again with the first pale light over the eastern horizon. To live beside the Nile is to live in harmony with this endless turning, to know that each day may differ in its details but will always be anchored by the same patient, eternal river. And so the night deepens. The last torch on the bank is extinguished, the last voice fades into the hum of insects and water. The stars wheel slowly overhead, mirrored in the dark, moving water. The Nile, ancient, unchanging, and alive, keeps its quiet watch until morning comes again.